today. So if you have any questions on any of the products we produce, we've got a lot of great representatives here that can talk about them. I have experience both on the small scale side of cannabis cultivation as well as large MSO side of production. So I like to think that I've seen kind of both sides of the world, and it's nice to be able to pull the best of both worlds to produce a facility that both monitors the quality of products being produced, as well as the inputs and the costs that are the critical part to maintaining a profitable business.
My name is Zachary Taylor. First time in Atlantic City. I've really enjoyed it here. Love the Jersey vibe. Born and raised in Denver, Colorado. I was the 8th 18-year-old to receive my license. I've been at this game about 18 years. Currently run an operation in Massachusetts. I've been out there about 8 years. We've been in production for about 6 years. What I think I could provide to this panel in a market like New Jersey is you guys are still thriving in this market. I think when it comes to CapEx and OpEx and really understanding how to maintain a profitable business through these hurdles, I think that hopefully through this panel we'll be able to provide some insight in that. But I'm just very happy to be here and really appreciate the welcome rapport I've received from New Jersey.
Yeah, nice to say. My name is Anthony Hagman. I'm the VP of Operations at Hamilton Farms. We are a local New Jersey operator, cultivation license only, but we just received manufacturing a couple weeks ago. We got our license about 2 years ago in November here, and been operating with cultivation only ever since. We were one of the first brands, the first 3 brands to hit market in the new recreational program after the rollover from medical. It was an exciting time to get started. In the beginning was, a lot of getting our brand built and out there, and then the second year has been expanding upon the first year with more brands, more SKUs, more categories, as profitability means you have to keep selling all the products that you're growing. My background is all Colorado legacy for the most part. I started off in the medical space back early days, 2005, and I grew that into a pretty large legacy profile in Colorado that led me to a legal battle, unfortunately. But I had a resurgence when Hamilton Farms was founded, and I had the chance to come out here and started with the founders. And I was first one in. I helped design, consult on the operations of the beginning phases, and then went from Director of Cultivation to the VP of Operations this last year to help build the sales force, marketing team, and everything that we needed to grow from scratch. We are a completely self-funded and self-reliant company. We've taken no funding or financing outside of the families that invested into this company, and we've worked really hard to keep that true, to be a 100% locally owned and operated company. Also happy to be here. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, and thank you all for joining. My name is Mikhail Segal, and I'm the CEO of TSRgrow. We're known for our smart-powered advanced LED lighting, where we've decoupled the drivers off the fixtures, centralize all the power for better integration into the building management system, and lower operating costs, energy savings, and being able to really deliver and create recipes to drive the photons where you need them when you need them for optimized grow. One of the things, just jumping in, that I think is we've got a great diverse panel here where we've got vertical integration to greenhouse growing to indoor cultivation and non-vertical, but as well as from Massachusetts, where you see a tremendous amount of price compression, to New Jersey being a robust market, but also at some point potentially having facing some of the things where you have unlimited licensing going on, and it becomes harder and harder to navigate in that space. So I'd like each, maybe start with you, Anthony, but each of you to kind of talk about in this industry, given the different types of verticals you are, it's challenging to be successful, whether you're just cultivating and selling to the stores, or being vertically integrated to having an outlet. But what are some of the key things in your, maybe talk about the type of operation you have, but what are the key things that are important for your success and similar, kind of cultivations to be successful in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that one of the key points is being cultivation license only. Kind of minimizes your ability to spread wide. So we had to think creatively to be able to take the material that we were producing and put it into as many platforms as possible to, be marketable inherently. The first year we were just releasing, 2 SKUs basically. We had a 3.5 gram eighth Mylar bag and a pre-roll. It was easy to sell in the beginning. We were a new brand, taking off, and people caught on to that pretty quickly. But as more brands came on, as more options came out there, just having 2 SKUs on a menu wasn't very appetizing for the retail market. So back in November of last year, we started strategizing new SKUs, glass jar products, going into multiple multi-packs for pre-rolls, sub-branding some lower priced items, working with collaborations, white label projects, really diversifying our menu source so that we went from 3 SKUs back in November of last year to 45 SKUs now. Was a big jump and a lot to manage, but it's allowed us to take our wholesale portfolio and ensure it has all the directions to move while still fresh. Nobody wants to buy, I wouldn't say nobody, most people don't want to buy 6-month-old, 12-month-old products. So getting it out there in the first few months is the key point, I think, of keeping your margins as high as possible and keeping the wheel turning for the next rotation of crops coming.
So I think, when you look at investor decks and you look at EBITDA and, when you're really looking at, pre-revenue as well as post-revenue, the first 2 years are glorious. And I think what's important is to make sure that as you continue to go past those first 2 years, what have you done to sustain that profit margins? And so I was, listening to a podcast the other week, and this gentleman was he's a Fortune 500 CEO, and he was describing business like pinball, and I found it really parallel and profound. And what he was talking about is essentially, in certain parts of business and in the first couple of years, you're basically just keeping that ball alive, right? And you can make profits doing so. But if you really want to be strategic in business, much like in pinball, you really have to understand, okay, I need to hit this particular button to get the 4 ball, the 5 ball, and how you get the maximum amount of points in pinball is really how you can maximize, your cannabis business. And then what I would advise is, as kind of Anthony was alluding to, is I think all of us as growers have kind of created this cheesecake factory menu, right? Where we go from a couple SKUs to where we offer, 50 SKUs. But last time I checked, I don't want to eat a steak at Cheesecake Factory. I just want cheesecake, right? So really focusing on what the demographic is and what the SKUs and what your brand is. So coming from Colorado and really, focusing on, it is a piggyback league. So being, one of the original, entrepreneurs and pioneers in that legal market, I realized that rosin was going to be a centerpiece in other markets. And you see that continuing to happen in other markets here. So Jersey is still a little bit early, but you will eventually see the same thing that's happened in other markets where the pre-roll, if you're looking at the whole piece of the pie, right, the pre-rolls will continue to go up, flower will remain king. But you look at this distillate resin market and this edible market, and that will eventually turn into the solventless market. So it's kind of looking at different trends. It's looking at what's worked in other, states, but also being true to yourself. Going back to, one of my favorite shows in Showtime, Nancy Botwin, she said, good weed sells itself. It does not anymore. So, you could have the best weed in the world, but without a brand and that 360, and really, part of that brand comes with that trust, right? And so it's really, a matter of, getting out there and building that trust with your patrons, with your customers, with your fellow colleagues. And I think it's, again, going back to that pinball analogy, once you get past those first couple of years, you can't just keep that ball alive. It really is, focusing on, how to drive those margins. The other thing I think is important to notice is when you look at, particularly this is about, cultivation and, how we maximize our profits in cultivation. And when you look at the market, it's transitioned so much to, from the legacy standpoint, it was how many pounds we got per light. Now we're really looking at how many grams we produce per square foot. But it's not just a matter of yield, it's the right yield. And making sure that that right yield ends up in that right SKU. Again, certain plants should be grown based on their trichomes and their bulbal structure for rosin. Certain plants should be grown for flower. And allowing those plants to be highlighted in the SKU that best serves your market and your company.
I would say one aspect that I think we can all agree on this panel is important for all of our businesses is consistency, both in quality but as well as in quantity, where it is unique to hybrid greenhouse growers like myself and Glass Meadows Company, whereas in New Jersey in particular, there's seasonality out here. You have to account for that in the products that you're putting out on the market. From the quality aspect, I want to make sure that the consumers that are taking your products are getting the same experience in June that they're getting in December. And one of the unfortunate challenges with this seasonality is that most greenhouse growers, if they don't provide the appropriate lighting supplementation in those winter months, will see reductions in yield of 40% or more. And not only that, but you're going to see smaller bud sites, you're going to see less trichome density, and that's going to impact the overall experience that end consumer is going to get. Some of the impacts of this on your bottom line are going to look like, hey, we have this great market share in June, July, August, but it starts to dip off in these winter months because we just can't supply that right amount if you don't have the right systems in place to maintain both that consistent quality and the consistent quantity. From a wholesale perspective, if you are selling bulk biomass or if you're selling bulk extracts to another manufacturer, you might lose out on contracts because you can't maintain that consistency in quantity from one month to the next. So I would say that one of the key components for a hybrid greenhouse facility is to put those processes in place where you know you're going to get the same style yields month 1 as you do month 12.
Taking on, the concept of quality and consistency, a lot is being done and talked about and applied in terms of tissue culture and genetics and what is done in from Gen Zero mothers to clones to cleaning your genetics and putting them into libraries. What are in terms of maintaining some of those things? We've also we've seen some of our customers in Europe, for example, where space is tight, looking at going to even no veg or almost very little veg to save space and jump right into flower. Maybe even mitigating mothers in Germany. A lot of the social clubs are eliminating even the mother space and just buying clones. But what are you seeing? We'll start with you. What are you seeing and what are you doing with tissue culture to help that consistency in your cultivation?
Absolutely. So,
and how important is that to the success and profitability?
So the importance of consistent cultivars can't be understated. And look, we all love hunting. We all love popping those first seeds. But at the end of the day, we're not plant breeders. We're not plant geneticists. We need to realize that it takes years to develop the right cultivars, and we can't imagine that, hey, we're going to put a seed in the ground on day 1, and by this time next year, we're going to have the best of the best strains that are out there. And I think that's where tissue culture and tissue culture banks really come into play, because you're able to get these tried and true genetics that are pest and disease free, so you can start day 1 hitting the ground running with not only quality tested cultivars, but also cultivars that you can rely on a consistent yield or a consistent plant structure. So one of the things that I like to focus a lot on is the 2 main cost inputs in a greenhouse to me are energy and labor. Labor is always going to be your most expensive, and if you're growing a variety of plants that have a different plant structure, you are going to have a wild instability of your labor demands from one week to the next. So one week you might be trimming on this short bushy plant, and the next week you're trimming on something 8 feet tall. And the different labor requirements for each of those mean that you're going to have to overhire and overextend your hours of operation in order to achieve that consistency and quality. So I think that's where the benefits of tissue culture and tissue culture banks come into play, is you can utilize genetics that maybe you've seen in another market, maybe you've seen in another partner grow, and you can implement them day 1, hit the ground running.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the tissue culture, in my opinion, brings cannabis to the sophistication level of other angiosperms and other commercial plants, where it should be, right? If you look at, so at Bountiful Farms, we've operated a tissue culture lab for a little over 2 years. I have 3 scientists that work in that lab that are true plant scientists. Again, I think that's what's important, is we need to get away from the bro science of CalMag fixes everything, right? And and it's real.
I'm laughing because
it's real. A little bit more CalMag, man. I mean,
that looks terrible. Put some CalMag on it. I know what's wrong. You need more CalMag.
Guilty.
So, I don't believe in the master grower notion. I think that it's 33%. It's your genetics. It is your grower and it's your environment. It's understanding what genetics you can grow in that environment and then how you can make them successful as that grower. But going back into tissue culture, hop latent is real. Everybody has hop latent. And if you don't realize you have hop latent, it's just a matter of time until you realize the impact of that, particularly on the fiscal aspect of that. Hop latent comes from seeds now. And so, the aspect of, what tissue culture does, going back into the sophistication of that, if you look at, bananas, if you look at soybeans, 75% of the production of that plant comes from tissue culture. One, looking at the square footage of that, you can look at you can have these meristems and you can house them and you can house hundreds of thousands of plants in a 1,000 square foot area. And also the most important part is the viroid free part, right? So it's important to note that tissue culture oftentimes has this misnomer kind of aspect to that. What I mean by that is there's variability to tissue culture, right? So if you're going down to the meristem itself and actually cleaning up the meristem, that in itself is tissue culture, right? But also just, micro propping is a form of tissue culture. But you cannot get rid of viroids unless you're truly going down into the undifferentiated cluster of meristems themselves and truly meristeming. And I think all of us up here understand how to do that, but not only is it challenging to do from a dexterity point, but it's just a matter of we've lived our lives in the grows. You need to have someone who's lived their life underneath the hood, right? And those are two different skill sets, right? And so I think that blending that in and really, hiring true, plant scientists who went to school for these things, can really help you, get on that next level. I did a podcast with a gentleman who owns a tissue culture company out of all places, Texas. And he's able to do so due to the 0.03 tetrahydrocannabinol that tissue culture allows, which is another thing if we're talking from a profitability standpoint. Tissue culture, can bypass interstate commerce. I can send tissue culture clones to Europe. I can send them to you guys in New Jersey. I can send them everywhere because the meristems themselves and the plant tissues, once it grows up to that rate, will then test under 0.03 tetrahydrocannabinol. And so, it opens up a lot of avenues. As you were alluding to, what it really does is, it helps, provide that genetic that you've had on the market that was year one. If you don't have tissue culture or you don't have the proper rotations in mothers, you will eventually have what they call epigenetic plasticity or dudding, and that shit will not produce resin like it used to. and that's just a real aspect of that. And so when you build a brand and you build the strain and then you build all that marketing around that strain, it's important that that strain still has that same integrity as it had at day one. And the only way to achieve that is through tissue culture.
Well said for both of you. Thank you. I want to back both these guys. First of all, consistency. Tissue culture provides a genetic identical process. Every single time you grow that Gen 0, it's going to be the exact same size as its twins that were propagated as well. So consistency across canopies, no matter how small or large, is a huge factor with your consistency for your yields, for your BPD, for your airflows, your ability to treat IPM. So the consistency layer by itself is one major factor. Going back to the beginning and just keeping it clean, keeping your space free of disease, pests, any of those things, it's a no-brainer from an operational standpoint. We recently brought in a tissue culture lab into our space. We ran the first year and a half as a traditional mom prop setup, and it works. It's what we've been doing for a long time, but we have 100 genetics that we're housing. We have probably 50 of them that haven't seen a production cycle in 6 months plus. So they've been a mother grown full scale, or at least to a foot or two, back to death over and over again for a year now. That's some of them are on Gen 8, Gen 9. Genetic drift is a real thing. You're housing pathogens, you're housing disease, and that room itself it's a pure cost. Your mother room, your prop room, they don't bring you any value other than the plants that they're going to produce in production, but they cost you an electric bill, they cost you, the labor that it takes to run the room, all the consumables. When we ran our cost, it was around $9,000 a month in just raw costs to keep a mother in prop room alive. And the cost of bringing tissue culture in is an investment, obviously, but over time, it brings that cost down to zero. We chose, similar to your perspective, we brought in a lab professional, somebody that had 5 to 10 years of lab experience to actually run our lab for us. The process is relatively straightforward. However, there's a lot of problems that can go wrong. So do we want to spend the next 6 months dialing in problems, or do we want to spend the next 1 week getting all of our plants into storage and cleaned out so we can start getting rid of our mothers? So we just this last week was our first week we got plants into storage, and I think now we have 25 genetics already in storage. It's a really fast process once it starts, and then obviously growing them back out to production does take some time. It can be 60 to 90 days to get them back out to full production, but the process is totally worth it, and it just takes a little more planning time to get your cycles planned out a little further ahead to make sure you have all of your tissue culture genetics ready to be multiplied at the right time.
Now, another, if you don't have a lab or maybe the resources to build out a lab, you were talking about the podcast you did, but we also done some work with genetics. But there are options. One possibility is you can now through genetics and other companies like those guys buy Gen 0 mothers, right, and have them delivered. Grow your mother, take your cuttings, plant, and then just replenish your mothers every 3 months. Is that how feasible is that? And I've heard a lot of talk about it, but how feasible is that, and is that a good path to start?
Yeah, I would say it depends on your scale. So someone who might be operating a facility that's 100,000 square feet or more might have the capex in their budget to install a tissue culture lab. A smaller grower, might make more sense to contract that process out and utilize someone like Genetics, who will both clean up some of the genetics that you find as your bread and butter strains, but also they have their own genetics bank of really good quality producing strains that they can get out to you, on a moment's notice for a lot of these that they have in stock. So I think it all depends on scale and what your objectives are. If your objectives are to house all of your mothers in-house, then it's appropriate to invest in a larger scale tissue culture facility in-house. But if you're just looking to bring in a few tissue culture cuts to get your growth started, absolutely use someone like Genetics as a resource to reach out to and get started with.
I'd like to, unless you guys have anything.
No, I think that what you're going to see in the next 5 years is, whether it's Genetics or other nursery models, that subscription model is going to continue to thrive. And looking at the European market, what's fascinating is going back to my nug porn days of the late 90s. We were so fascinated with European genetics, and now it's flipped, right? So you look at Barney's and some of the original old school seed banks. They're now looking at the U.S. genetics and particular regions of the U.S. and they're highly sought after, and so that subscription model is going to continue. I don't think that the pollen chucking days and the pheno hunting days will stay. I think that you are going to get into, again, regardless of who you're purchasing from, that subscription model is going to be the new foundation of cannabis. And whether or not you're purchasing mothers or whether or not you're purchasing your entire catalog from these various companies, I think that that's going to be a trend that you see, that seeds are going to decline, and it's about getting the best. Again, going back into pheno hunting, you don't want a variation of Skittles, you want Skittles. You want the real deal Holyfield Skittles. You want the real Triangle Kush, and through these banks, those are now available pathogen free.
Yeah. Again, you guys are just nailing it. We believe it's so hard that we plan on providing that service to New Jersey as much as is available and allowed. We believe this tissue culture process is the future. In the next few years, there'll be no other option if you want to be competitive in this market. If you want to stay on top of all the best genetics and the most clean genetics, you won't have another beyond possibility. So we're setting our lab up to be able to house, not just our own, but outsource as well, and be able to supply. So, like you guys said, at a certain scale, when you're a small cultivator, the cost it takes to build out a lab is just not worth it. We are taking that investment on ourselves to be able to build out a little bit larger, to be able to supply for the larger demand. So I think more of what we're doing will pop up across the country and supply a much better selection for clean genetics to the entire national market and probably international market as well.
So profitability is, hindered a lot by 1080E and, some other things, and there's been a lot of talk about, I wanna just go down the rabbit hole briefly of rescheduling, but there's a lot of talk on rescheduling for, to Schedule 3 and, which would allow for potentially alleviating some of the tax burdens and allow write-offs and operate as a real business. But with that, comes the potential of a lot of other inherent risks, or potential restrictions or requirements or oversight, moving in from, pharmaceutical or other things, and potentially putting onerous requirements on grows. So is it a good thing, in reality for the cultivations that we have running today, or that are looking to open? Is it a good thing, and what kind of things are going to be, come along that we don't know? Is it, I feel like there's a lot of surprises behind that door of potential opportunity and good that are going to be very onerous for a lot of cultivations.
So I think one of the potential downsides of the 280E opportunities is that we will see a significant influx of cash into a lot of companies across the New Jersey market, which will tailor to expansion and ultimately potential for price compression in the state. So that's my potential concern. I think the benefit that we don't often think about when it comes to rescheduling is the changes in burden reduction when it comes to research. So both from a consumer standpoint, but also from a producer standpoint. So from a consumer standpoint, we all like to talk about the strain variations based on what terpenes or what cannabinoids are in this strain, but there's so much more that has only been lightly researched that we don't have the research-backed facilities that have taken the time to do peer-reviewed studies to talk about all the alcohol ester compounds, all the other terpenoids that are within the cannabis plant that impact that entourage effect, that right now you don't see it on a COA. You don't know what else is in there outside of general cannabinoids, general terpenes. There's a whole lot more that goes into that strain component. So I think there's a lot of value in that research, but also, all of, I say big ag, and I don't mean it as a negative thing, but every agronomic crop, soybean, corn, whatever it may be, has had decades upon decades of research opportunities so that growers, everyday farmers know, hey, if I put this amount of fertilizer on my field, this is the nutrient assay I should expect in my leaf tissue 6 months down the road. We don't have anything like that for cannabis because the research opportunities are just not there under the way that it is currently scheduled. So I think if we saw rescheduling to Schedule 3, a lot more of those opportunities would come up, and we as cultivators would have the research and the knowledge to standardize practices more on a broad level to know, hey, these are some of the application protocols that I can go into if I'm seeing X, Y, or Z. So leading even into pesticide application, biological application, efficacies that, we can look at almost any FERPA exempt pesticide, minimum risk use of pesticide, biological use to control some of these pest and diseases that we all deal with, and very few of them have any type of application rates for hemp or cannabis because it just hasn't been studied yet and the opportunities haven't been out there. So I would say from a regulatory standpoint, rescheduling has potential con of this huge influx of cash, but a benefit of additional research that we may see in the coming decade.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, touching on that research aspect of it, we still live and this reefer madness in a lot of ways, and I call it the schizophrenic society, right? So we still live under the 1970 Nixon administration, obviously with it being still a Schedule 1, right? So for it to be descheduled, again, as you touched on the research development, where I think that's impactful is we still are looking at, 1964 and 1988 as like the true years and the pinnacles of research of cannabis. And what I mean by that is in 64, they discovered that tetrahydrocannabinol had the delta 9. In 1988, they did an andamine. But in terms of, really what looks at the endocannabinoid system and the flavonoids and ketones and all the things Dom touched on, we don't know any of that. We're just, touching the tip of the iceberg. So it would be great to actually have, federal funding on that. The other thing that I think that the benefit of the descheduling could have is a standard on the standard. And, what I mean by that is, you look at, across all of these states that are both, medical and recreational, whether it's heavy metals, whether it's pesticides, whether it's colony forming units, and I don't necessarily want to get into the whole testing talk, but it's not the same across every state, right? So if this is all about public health and safety, are you really saying that the product that was grown in this state under, this, certain judicial, box or, these regulations is healthy here, but is not healthy there? So I think it's important to have that standard on the standard, but the only way to have that standard on the standard is to actually truly understand and regulate in the form that we need to, which is understanding that cannabis is not tobacco, cannabis is not spearmint. And the reason that I bring those up is because a lot of the regulations have been put forth as that, right? So if you look at, as an example, the colony forming units coming from Colorado and, and this gentleman, Matt Cook, who invented what everyone else is piggybacked on, they looked at spearmints and they looked at spearmint has trichomes and thus affiliated what they believe the colony forming units for trichomes to be parallel with cannabis. I've never attempted to smoke spearmint, but I don't think it's the same. So, again, I think the standard on the standard is the benefit of that, but there certainly are some cons as well.
Absolutely. I mean, again, consistency, keeping, if you go from state to state to state, having consistent consumer experience would be a nice thing, right? I come from a world that is pre-regulation. When we were in Colorado, early medical days, it wasn't regulated very tightly. Those regulations became tighter over time, and then the 2011, law that passed that brought recreation on. Coming from the area that I was from, we assumed that the small business was going to be the biggest benefit to the new law that came in, and the local community that was supporting this, the scene was the community that was going to be able to get to have the businesses that ran and continue to ran. And that was the case for a moment, but then big money came in, right? A lot of corporations came into Colorado. They started buying out everything that wasn't doing that great. They started conglomerizing to 12, 15 locations across the state. I think that Colorado still has a lot of character and a lot of community to it, but I did see a mass corporatization very quickly. And one of my big fears of a rescheduling in our community would be a similar trait of a federal level of mass corporatization over a community that has been a grassroots-based community since the beginning. I just think we need to be playing on both sides, the corporations and the grassroots community to come together and play together. I don't want to see it being steamrolled. So I'm very on board with the rescheduling. I think that the research that comes with it is invaluable, especially with the isolation of cannabinoids. We don't even know yet what that means if we isolate cannabinoids and then recombine to particular combinations to potentially treat ailments. The true actual plant medicine could be unlocked with this rescheduling. So I think that it's still, for me, I'm 50-50. I need to see more of what the regulation would look like and how it actually affects us as a pre-regulated economy. And would we be allowed to continue to regulate ourselves, or do we have to apply for new licenses and go through a new system that's been set forth by a new government?
Profitability is obviously the key, one of the things we're talking about, and equipment plays a big role in profitability, and there's lots of widgets and gadgets and high-end things and attractive things to purchase, but are they really affecting your bottom line? Really the key is investing in things that are going to really impact your bottom line. From an equipment perspective, whether it's of course our lighting, But the lighting, HVAC things, what are the types of, what are the key areas to look at in terms of equipment and other things that go into the facility and what you're building that are important for your bottom line, and what are ones that are nice to haves but maybe are not not things to focus on. If you want to start in.
Sure. I mean, we've already said it. Labor is the #1 source of the expense. So the question is automation versus human labor for almost every step of the way. Plants can be hand watered. How many people does it take to water how many plants per day? I think that the first biggest savings is going with automated irrigation. As nice as it is to have the hand touch with watering plants, if you're in a crop steering program, if you're doing substrate sensors, monitoring drybacks, stacking ECs, all that needs to be done with an injection system that can dial in all that feed schedule to perfection. So between that and your environmental controls, that's going to be your key factors in keeping these rooms to maximum potential. Irrigation strategy, making sure that your lighting, your BPD, your heat, humidity, everything is in line in parameters throughout the entire cycle. Even 1 week of things being out will throw off the entire cycle, and waste your entire crop. So I'd say fertigation systems and environmental controls. We use GrowLink was our control system. Runs our AC units, runs our dehumidifiers, runs our fertigation, all through my phone, through an app I can check on anywhere from the world, as long as I have the internet. Allows me to have access and control and accountability from anywhere, anytime, and that allows us to run a smaller team. So right now we have almost 3,000 square feet of canopy that we're running with 3 cultivators. And we have a post-harvest team of about 8 people. Of course, production and everything takes more, but 3 people actually hands-on plants from clone all the way to harvest. So it's a very lean team.
Yeah. So we started build out in 2018, and then we dropped seed 2 weeks before COVID. So I couldn't hire anybody. So I lived at the grow, and I mean I lived at the grow for 6 months. Me and my 2 dudes, and so again, as Anthony pointed out, what makes cannabis different than any other business, particularly when you look at the cultivation aspect of it, is labor is always your greatest cost, right? But so electricity is the second highest, and in some cases could be even higher than your labor, right? So to obviously Anthony kind of touched on the automation aspect of labor and finding that balance, and I think that the key balance there is understanding where automation impacts quality, or where it both on a positive and negative sector. So what I mean by that is, obviously wet trimming is vastly faster, but it is 1,000% impacting the overall quality of that product, right? So you can automate trimming, you could have 5 twisters in there, but the only way to go about that is to actually wet trim that, right? So that is a prime example of where automation is detrimental. I look at every one of my plants like they're training for the Olympics. And we got 63 days to do it, and every day in which we're not optimizing that training, both from a vapor pressure deficit as well as crop steering, not only from an environmental aspect, but from the lighting aspect, and how we're really, being synergistic with those tomatoes and the transpiration of that. And so again, going back into the electricity standpoint, how I consulted to build out grows in 2012 is certainly not how I would consult to build them out now in 2025, right? I would never build another grow without an LED company, and this isn't just a false plug, but I've tried them all, right? And so I think that a lot of the companies, I think that when I described LEDs in a lot of ways like tissues, and what I mean by that is there's a specific company that took over the market. And oftentimes, obviously, Kleenex is the most widely known brand of tissues, and oftentimes you'll ask for a Kleenex as opposed to a tissue because you just associate it with that brand, right? So there was a particular brand in the market that everybody went behind from an LED standpoint, and I've ripped out all of those and went with TSR, and I've been working with them for over 5 years. And really, what is made me do that is the attention to detail when you're looking at this isn't just putting LEDs, in a bar and, making signs. This is really understanding, the full, what the importance of spectrum and intensity and, the balance between those two. And so again, when you talk about, the right yields, you could have 1,500 ppfds and have some blown out buds and get 90 grams per square foot, and good luck selling that, right? So it's not always about, yield, it's the right yield. And so again, going back into it's, monitoring your labor and your electricity.
Well said. I would like to, touch on a point that we don't talk about too much from an equipment standpoint, and that is an appropriate alarm notification system. So we are all running intensive agricultural facilities, whereas if a chiller goes down, a boiler system goes down, you can lose a whole crop, and that can be a company killer right there. So if you don't have a system in place that your sensors are notifying you at 2 a.m., ringing your phone until you pick up, that is that right there. While we feel that it is absolutely a pain. No one wants to get up at 2 a.m. But hey, what's the alternative? The whole crop goes to waste. I think it is a crucial point that if there's one thing you're going to invest in, make sure the equipment that you have has an appropriate alarm notification. And then just as a general aspect of what I would say, with all the shiny fun things that are down there on the showroom floor, for anyone going down to look at equipment, first think about your pain points and then work yourself back and identify, all right, what equipment is going to solve these pain points, rather than trying to fit the equipment to your pain points after the fact based on a sales talk. So I can say, hey, from a greenhouse hybrid grow aspect, earlier I talked about that consistency in light intensity from June all the way through December. I know that my par needs to be X in order to meet that consistency in quality and consistency in quantity. So I need to go and make sure that the lighting that I get is going to achieve that. I also need to know that as a greenhouse grower, I'm going to have a hell of a time maintaining the humidity controls here in a northeast climate. Now, any grower knows that growing out in the northeast, you're going to have bud rot if you don't mitigate the humidity appropriately. So finding a solution that really mitigates that nighttime dew point where your lights go off, temperature starts to cool down, you get that dew point on your leaves. Finding equipment like a dry air dehumidifier, for example, that helps slow down that rate of humidity dropping on the leaves. Utilizing lighting systems that allow you to ramp down your lights instead of a hard stop. A lot of those things that we don't always think about is, that temperature drop that you experience when your lights go out have a profound impact on the leaf surface temperature that really can't be mitigated with something like an HPS light, because there is no dimmability with that. So utilizing an LED light, using that sunrise sunset setting, so that you're gradually bringing that leaf temperature up and gradually bringing it back down, so you can mitigate some bud rot potential, particularly for growers here in the Northeast.
I have a question for the moderator. I'm hearing a whole lot of that. The under canopy lighting is increasing the way that the bud, or from where it used to be a C, now you're breaking it up to a B, and then a B, now it's an A. Can you give me is that actual and actually been tested, or is it just basically sales buzzwords?
I think it is actual, but your inputs also drive your outputs. I think it's important to note that you are bringing more energy in, and not only with under canopy light, but there's also now side lighting, which is more effective at bringing light into the stomata of the leaf rather than under the underside, which is a little less natural for penetrating the plant. So side lighting or intercanopy lighting, but the thing that goes along with that is you also have to make sure that you're going to use more nutrients. You're going to have more transpiration because your plants are giving off, having higher outputs and more yield. But the short answer is yes, there is a positive impact of adding lighting, and whether it's, hey, the top lighting just wasn't enough to simulate and mimic the sun, which is really giving light everywhere into the plant, and this is where kind of the side lighting and under canopy is really bringing more of that holistic light into the plant structure. So you guys are, I know, testing and trialing, but you know, that's a great question.
A really easy test that you can do is, even without currently having under canopy or side canopy lighting, if you have a par sensor, go out to your plants, stick the par sensor underneath, and find where does that par drop off. I guarantee you that, you know, after 36 inches of plant canopy, you're going to be getting maybe 100 to 200 ppfd in that under 2 to 3 feet worth of canopy. So, you know, you can't expect the leaves to translocate the sugars that they're producing 3 feet down to the bud sites right next to them and have them be the same size as the buds up top that are getting 600, 800, 1200 ppfd. So great exercise. Take a par meter, stick it under your plant canopy, see where that drop off hits, and that's a good way you can identify what kind of lighting penetration you're getting through your canopy.
It does seem like a sales pitch, but I think that under canopy is real. So I think that, again, when you look at profitability, a lot of profitability comes back to jar appeal itself, right? So be able to take that C to B means that, you know, how we go about it, you know, based on the strain itself, you know, we have a particular count of nugs that we put into our 8s, right? And then we have our 14 gram SKUs and whatnot, right? So, but obviously our margins on our 8s is our highest profit margins, right? So if you're able to take that plant and then have those bees, you know, and vice versa. The other thing it really does is, again, going back to the labor aspect of it, is, you know, the defoliation and the plant maintenance and the bottoming of the plants. I'm not saying you're doing zero of that, but you're doing about 30% less, because you want to leave more of those photo sites on. You want to leave more of those bud sites, which ultimately would have been lost in that canopy. And with that under canopy, those bud sites can actually turn into profitable bud and not just larf. So it is, you know, what I will say is, just like with everything, there's a balance to it, right? So, you know, through my experimentation, too much far red can also cause hermaphroditic tendencies, right? These are very sexually frustrated females we're dealing with, right? And it's just what Sensimilia is, right? And so, you know, that fight or flight response can happen, and in some, you know, genetics that you wouldn't necessarily see those hermaphroditic tendencies. So those are the pros and cons with that, but it is real, and yes, it does work.
I've yet to use them, but we've talked about it. I think it depends on canopy depth. One big thing we talked about, right? If 36 inches deep, if you got a single tier and you got 6 foot tall plants and you're rocking a 4 foot, 4.5 foot canopy depth, then your under canopy lighting is going to be crucial to get anything of value at the bottom. We're currently in a 2-tier system with, you know, our plants are only 4 foot tall. We're actually 600 watt TSR. We're getting our bottoms, because we're doing a lollipop and a defold method, so more plant touching, but we're getting our bottoms to be, you know, most people's Bs, what we're calling our Cs, with the intensity of those TSRs pushing through our canopy, but it takes more plant maintenance to get to that. So I would say that's your trade-off. Do you want to spend more effort on labor to get through and clean up the canopy and allow penetration through, or do you want to put those lights in, allow penetration to be there from the lights themselves?
Just to follow up on that 2-tier that you just talked about, how do you control the upper layer of the humidity versus the lower level? I mean, it's a struggle. I mean, the struggle is real when you do. Oh my gosh, when you start doing that, it is hard to control that microclimate on a double tier versus. It's not to say it's easy, but yeah, 1 tier you you almost can set it, forget it. But 2 tiers, you're always working, you're always monitoring, going back to the alarms and everything. It's like 1 tier's alarm, 1 tier's not.
So I would say, like, our experience is the top tier has better airflow, always has a better BPD, always has 15-20% higher yield, just by consistency. Bottom tier, just because it has that layer above it that's preventing airflow from moving upward, we get just slightly less consistency on the bottom. The quality is good, just the yields are down a little bit. Our BBT is always a little bit harder to control down there. We only have single cage fans moving air and like a cycle movement, but there are systems that will allow for better airflow through the canopy, such as the benching airflow systems. A little more expense goes into that, but then it prevents those microclimates from building up inside the canopy, at least more than what ours is. So I would say the two-tier has a lot of benefits for space conservation, but there are a lot of downfalls for the extra effort it takes to keep your VPD and your airflow consistent throughout the process.
One of the things that, little tip that helped me was FLIR imaging. So if you do a FLIR imaging of your room, you can really see hot and cold spots, and then you can add adequate airflow accordingly. Again, I think it's important as we get out of this hobbyist level, oscillating fans and things of those natures, you need something that's really going to move CFMs, right? And so, that's the most important thing in these microclimates is airflow and the homogenization of that airflow. And so whether you're going, we have like a reheat system, which allows you to, dehumidify, cool, and heat, right? If you don't have that advanced of a system, you need to make sure that, it all goes back into making sure that your environment was spec'd not for the subcooling of humans, but for the transpiration of plants, right? So, first and foremost, you got to make sure that you're able to hit that set point on your dehumidification, right? And then airflow is key, but you hit it on the head. So we have 3 single-tier rooms and then 4 double-stacked rooms, and the microclimates in those double-stacked rooms, they took us almost a year to really dial in. And FLIR imaging, again, did help with that, meeting various vendors, downstairs who are really, again, focusing on, moving those CFMs as well as, being proactive with the cleaning of the air as well. So what I mean by that is HEPA scrubbers, making sure that the air in which you're moving is clean air.
So while it's not my current facility, the last facility I worked at, we utilized the 2-tier system as well. And if you're still in the build-out phase, I'd recommend to think of it as you're growing 2 different tiers. Think of it as 2 different rooms. You should have 2 different returns, 2 different supplies, so that you're treating each level as a different zone. Otherwise, if you try and factor one level of HVAC heating or cooling to both levels, you're never going to achieve consistency across both sides. If you are already past the build-out phase, what I have found is duck socks are your friend. They will get the air where you need it. So if you don't have that breakout between the 2 different levels, think of something beyond just like we mentioned earlier, the oscillating fans. Utilizing the technology to get the cooling directly where you need it, as opposed to just a hope and pray with the oscillation fan.
I think we're running out of time, but we can move outside. The one other thing I just want to emphasize is, thank you all for coming. Thank you guys for being up here. But energy and power are key. And there's a lot of money out there in rebates that can also help you. And I'd be more than happy to talk to you, but there's cogeneration, especially in New Jersey, there's a lot of different programs. Cogeneration, lighting, we can get 100% free. So there's and then there's HVAC rebates and other things. So I'd be happy to talk to you guys outside and feel free to talk to any of our guys, but there's a lot of money in rebates and through the energy, and really putting an emphasis on energy efficiency is huge, because in indoor cultivation, the energy costs are only going to keep going up and be an anchor. So
do you see a bigger swing between states on rebates? Because I'm seeing one state's giving, like you said, almost 100%, the other was barely giving anything. So, in your opinion, would you consider New Jersey one of the better rebate states compared to other states? I'd say it's better. It also comes down to the utility. So it's a better state. There's different states, different levels, but there's also the utility. Like in Massachusetts, there are 2 utilities give rebates, and Zach unfortunately is in the municipal energy, and they get none. So let's say 0. You're still illegal, man.
State dependent and zone dependent and utility dependent.
We're not helping you. We don't want you.
And the systems and the equipment you put in plays a huge role. So from the type of HVAC, the type of lights, and the type of energy or power systems.
Now, within your company, are your company assisting with understanding the rebate? If somebody reach out and say, I'm in, let's say Maryland, what's out there that I can actually do with that state, or you make a consultant, like refer to a consultant and say?
No, we do all rebates. We don't charge anything. And I can tell you in Maryland, you get a very high rebate.
Okay.
Great to work with, seriously.
Yeah, we're at
Anyway,
that
thank you.
phase anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you. Definitely got to get one of your cards. Great
question.
Thank you. Yeah.